Avengers of AI and Commanders of Code, it's Prof G, and I'm about to show you how we can apply Apple's AI-driven coding intelligence in Xcode to describe code and add new features to a project. Now, I'll work off of the BipTheGuy project we just completed, we'll set up coding intelligence in Xcode, and we'll offer a brief tour of some of the major features of coding intelligence, but we'll also show in real time how poorly constructed prompts and overeager AI can give us results that we don't want. We'll learn to revert to earlier code, and we'll finally end up with an app that incorporates a liquid glass button and that saves the last image selected to the device so that it can appear the next time we run the app. Let the big learning begin. So a few things to know. One is that there has never been a better time to learn to code. There is so much help available for you, and the tools get better every day. In fact, there are 3 significant ways that Xcode will actually help you write code. One is code completion. Think of this as auto-suggest for code. So code completion looks at the characters that you've typed, and it considers the context. For example, in the spot where you're typing, could you want to add a view, a modifier, or parameters inside of parentheses? And code completion will use this to suggest all relevant options that contain the letters you've typed. Now, if you arrow through the suggestions that code completion makes, you can usually see a description of the terms and parameters that you have access to. And code completion is a great way to write code faster while avoiding typos and misspellings. Most developers use it. Then Apple began introducing AI in Xcode, first with predictive code completion. These are those grayed out suggestions that pop up inside the code as you type. Now with predictive code completion, Apple's models aren't simply making suggestions based on the characters you've typed, it's considering what you've been doing and guesses at what the next most likely statement or block of code that you want will be. Now, the current state of predictive code completion is it's often wrong. In fact, many developers think predictive code completion is sort of the Xcode equivalent of Clippy, the old annoying paperclip that used to pop up in Microsoft products, and they actually turn it off in Xcode settings. But you can also ignore it, type over it, and many times just dismiss it by typing the escape key. And finally, there's coding intelligence, introduced in Xcode 26 when running macOS 26. Now, this brings chatbot-style tools directly to Xcode, and you can add your own models. ChatGPT and Claude are the first 2 that are suggested by default, and if you've got a paid subscription, you can integrate those options too. And you can use these models to ask Xcode to explain code to you, to document code. It's really good at both of those things. In fact, I suggest to all my students that they use these tools as a tutor to help them walk through any code that they might not understand. And if the first response isn't clear, change your prompts. You can ask it to explain any terms it used that you don't understand, or sometimes it's helpful to ask it to describe the solution as if you're a complete beginner. Coding intelligence is also really great for creating mock data and example data, but you can actually use natural language to ask coding intelligence to write code for you. And here's another amazing thing. You can take a photograph of a drawing and drop that right into the natural language prompt where you type, and Xcode will consider that and actually try to generate code that builds a user interface based on your drawing. Now, it looks magical, and this can be super useful, but know that AI is often wrong, and I am not a hater. I use AI all the time. I'm not one of these professors that tells my students not to use AI. In fact, I really think you should use AI with your projects, but use AI well. I gotta tell you from firsthand experience, I have wasted hours when AI tools suggested the wrong thing. They suggested code that didn't work. They suggested code that I didn't want. AI often recommends deprecated code instead of the most modern techniques, and that's because these models are often trained on code bases that don't rely heavily on modern techniques that were recently introduced, and a lot of the suggestions I've gotten back were just clearly suboptimal. Now, here's something that's super important that a lot of people don't understand. So a lot of folks will vibe code and they'll think that AI is actually writing and executing and testing the code that it suggests, but that is not what's happening. None of these AI tools actually run the code they write. They're simply prediction models. So not only are they not executing the code that they give you and taking a look at the results, they also can't see any of the user interfaces that they build. So know those limitations. So AI can be a great tool for prototyping, for learning in the hands of an experienced programmer. It can be a great tool to get more done in a shorter amount of time. But unchecked or used by someone who's an inexperienced technologist, and AI can cause all sorts of problems. And that's why you'll hear so many experienced programmers, including me, insist that students gain a grasp of the basics. Now, if you do, you're going to be more likely to know when AI gives you a wrong answer. You're going to be able to more clearly incorporate any suggestions that AI gives you into your code. And really, super critically, you're going to be able to write better prompts. For example, if you got an idea of what AI has done wrong, you can coax it toward a better solution by more accurately describing what you want or the techniques it should be using. So with that as our backdrop, let's take a look at coding intelligence and apply it to the BipTheGuy app that we just built. So just as a reminder, we wrote a simple app that allows us to tap an image, it animates, and it plays a sound so it's like we're punching the image. And we learned to use SwiftUI's photo picker to add other images that you might want to bip. Hopefully you found this to be a solid learning tutorial. Now, one thing to note is if we restart the code, the image used in our app resets the default clown image, and we have to reload any image that we selected in the photo library. Now later in the tutorial, we'll ask AI to write code to save our image. Now if you're in Xcode, once you've upgraded to macOS 26 and Xcode 26 both, you'll probably notice changes to the user interface in the upper left. The icon to show the navigator's pane now looks like a bullet point list. It no longer looks like the opposite of the icon to show the inspector's pane over here on the right, but it works the same. It's a toggle that'll show or hide the navigator pane, but next to this is an icon that looks like lines on a page with a 4-pointed star next to it, and that's the coding intelligence icon. And when you click this, another pane opens up on the left. This isn't the navigator pane, it's the coding intelligence pane. Now, if you've never used this before, you can see that there's a setup button. We'll use that in a bit, but also know that the shortcuts have changed. Command 1 will toggle the navigator pane open and closed, and Command 0 will now toggle the coding assistant pane open and closed. Now let's click that setup button in the coding intelligence pane, and this opens up Xcode settings to the intelligence selection on the left-hand bar, and this is where you can choose the chatbot style large language models to integrate right into Xcode. ChatGPT and Claude are both offered by default. Now it seems the consensus in the developer community at the time I'm recording this lesson is that Claude is the better of these two models at coding in SwiftUI. But it's really close, and sometimes one is better than the other. There's not a clear case when you might want to use one versus the other. Now, you can use these free models until you exhaust a free tier, and then you can switch to the other one. I subscribe to the monthly plan for both of these models. If you're a professional developer, you might be able to declare these as tax-deductible work expenses. Talk to your accountant. I constantly use my two subscriptions to compare one versus the other. And if you're a student on scholarship or assistance, see if your administrator will let you spend funds on these tools. I'm really concerned that valuable AI tools like this are creating a new generation of haves and have-nots. And if you're in the education or scholarship community and you can advocate for more public access, you're doing a good thing for society. Hat tip to you. Now I'm off my soapbox. And now students at Boston College, where I teach, currently have access to privacy-protected Google Gemini and Microsoft Copilot. Now I haven't integrated these tools into Xcode, but there is this Add Model Provider button for models that aren't ChatGPT or Claude. But you can explore online how to get an API key to do just that. The AI models themselves should be able to walk you through these steps. I'll leave it to you to figure that out if you want to use something different, but I'm going to cancel out of this, and I've already got my two accounts set up. You can only use one at a time, so I'm going to select Claude and click the toggle to turn this on. Now, if I wasn't signed in, I'd be asked to sign in here, but I'm already in. So I'll close this, and we can check out our new AI coding partner. Now, do know AI answers to complex issues that might have multiple solutions aren't always consistent. I've gone through this example a few times with the same models, and each time the answer suggested was slightly different, so don't be surprised if your mileage varies. That's the nature of today's AI. Oh, and before we do anything else, I'm going to make sure that I've done a commit and push to GitHub. We've covered this in earlier lessons, so I'm not going to describe it, but it's always smart to make sure that you've backed up your work before you make any radical changes. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you is one of the most useful coding intelligence features for anyone that's trying to learn new things. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to select this photo pickers block here with all of its modifiers. Now, in our previous lessons, we covered the concept of the photos picker, and there's a lot going on here. There's an onChange modifier, a task block, a guard statement with try question mark, and a wait, and it uses load transferable. Now, these were all new concepts when introduced. And if you think more explanation would be useful, or if you return to this code and you want to reuse portions and you forgot exactly what it did, well, you can just highlight the block of text that you want described. Then to the left of the line numbers, at the top of the highlight, you'll see the coding intelligence icon, that little star with the lines. Click this and you get three options. You can explain, document the code, or generate a playground, which generates one of the Xcode 26 new playgrounds that can appear right inside this code file. So you can test it out right here. You don't even have to create a separate playground file. We'll skip that in the documentation for now, and let's just select explain. And the model starts to cascade an explanation in the coding intelligence pane on the left, and we see it break things down by sections. First, the photos picker. Now, it might look like the code is cut off, but you can click to expand this so that you can read all of the code in the pop-up balloons. Then click back out to exit, and you can see below this code, the view and all of its parameters are described. It's awesome. And if you keep scrolling, you get a description of the onChange modifier, the guard statement, and it wraps up with a how it all works. You can help improve the AI results by clicking on the thumbs up or thumbs down. You don't have to. I hope you click thumbs up on this lesson, though. And it's nice we get confirmation down here that this is a modern, clean way to handle photo selection in SwiftUI apps, and it takes advantage of the built-in photo picker. If there were problems with the code or areas for glaring improvement, we'd also get information on that. And this is a really spectacular feature. It's like having an experienced coder over your shoulder, ready to answer your questions whenever you have them, and you can take as long as you want to consider the answer. Can't see your professor or TA? AI may very well give you an even better description immediately anytime you need it. It's awesome, and while I'm often unsatisfied with the quality of AI-generated code, I gotta tell you that the explanations here are usually fantastic. Plus, you've got a natural language field down below where you can enter additional questions, like if you need more explanation or a particular term or concept defined. And remember, you can add prompts like, describe to me as if I'm a complete beginner, try again, and give me a beginner's description of the optional, why it's used, and why we need to deal with it. You are in charge of the dialogue. And I know from years of experience that when a student sees me with questions, sometimes students need more time to think about an answer that I might give them. Sometimes they feel pressure because they're on the spot to try to absorb complex concepts right away. First of all, don't be nervous when coming to office hours, but I know this happens. Well, hopefully AI doesn't intimidate you, and you can take your time, experiment, ask more questions. You are completely in charge. So now let's have AI write some code for us. Now in the prompt box down here, I'm going to type in, can you update the app for liquid glass? Now during the week I've recorded this, iOS 26 was officially released. And at this point, there weren't a lot of training examples containing liquid glass. And we're going to see what we might consider a lack of AI experience in the low quality of the answer that's returned. Now this answer did come back fairly quickly, but I did speed things up a bit here. And what I got is really not a very good answer at all. It gave me a lot of things I didn't want. It added a background with a gradient. It shrunk the image by putting it in a frame. I didn't request that. And it did a bad job of the one thing that I requested, making the button adhere to the liquid glass effect. I'd expected the corner concentricity feature to keep the button with a sort of capsule shape that I'd had. That's really the iOS 26 standard, but the AI broke that model here. And instead, it added a glass effect around the photo picker, but it included a corner radius instead of the container relative property that I taught my students about in an earlier class. So I actually want to undo these changes, and here's how I do that. Now the easiest thing to show you would be to click on the revert button, and that'll undo the changes that were just made. And I'll show you a few things. Now do know that the features I'm about to show you only work if you've enabled Git for your project, and I always advise you to do that, so you should be fine. Now to roll back these changes that were made, the easiest thing would be simply to click the revert button, which is at the end of the explanation of your code that was just added. I've circled it on screen. But also know that Xcode maintains a history of the conversations with the model so that you can review your past responses, track changes, return to any previous state of your project. And clicking this project history button here, that's the little clock icon, shows the modification history in this conversation. So it'll show you all the prompts that you've entered. Now there's a slider to the right of these prompts, and at the bottom I can see that there's a cancel button and a restore button, and the restored button is disabled because I'm showing all of the code at my last prompt. I've got nothing to revert. But if I slid the slider up, then I'd return to the code that I had after I entered this prompt. That would enable the restore button at the bottom, and if I clicked on restore, I'd go back to the code before it made this liquid glass change. Now there's also a label that appears to the left of the modification history clock. Now, the modification history shows each of the prompts inside of a conversation, but if I click here, I see a pop-up of all of the previous conversations I had with AI. Now conversations aren't the same thing as prompts. Conversations are considered separate sessions, and each conversation could have multiple prompts. Now the reason I have several conversations in here and you probably don't is because it seems like Xcode started a new conversation every time I turned off coding intelligence and then turned it back on. I did that a few times as I was setting up the script and making notes for the lesson I'm recording right now. Now, if you ever did want to start a new conversation to keep track of a new set of prompts, you could just click on this button in the upper left that looks like a pencil on a piece of paper. That'd start a new conversation that keeps track of a new set of prompts that's different from your previous conversation. So you probably don't have a bunch of conversations in here, but if you did, you could pull down and select them to go back to your earlier conversation. So watch these steps that I'll perform even though you can't because I have multiple conversations in here. I'm going to select an earlier conversation where I also made a failed attempt at a liquid glass change, and I can click on the modification clock, and this shows the code at the end of that conversation. Now I can click the revert button at the bottom of this response to go back to my earlier code, and it just so happens that this code is identical to the code that we had at the start of this lesson. And if you haven't already, why don't you find and click the revert button that's probably at the end of the bottom of your current response. That should give us both the same code that we had before our failed attempt at liquid glass. Now I'll point out a few more things. Down here there's a pair of binoculars. This is the project aware context button, and when this is on, and that's the default, all the code in your project is shared with the model that you've connected to. Now we don't have a multi-file project here, but if we did, Coding Intelligence would look at all of our project files. It would share all the files in this project back with the AI service that we're using. It does that to better understand how our code works. Now this is so Coding Intelligence can better understand all of the work in the project and so that it can make suggestions that apply to the whole project. Now with it off, Coding Intelligence doesn't have the context of your whole project, so it's more like a general SwiftUI helper there than a helper that can look at your entire project. Now this raises a question. Is my code safe, or am I giving up potentially proprietary information to third-party AI models? Well, Apple is really clear that its own Coding Intelligence doesn't use your data to train Apple models, and Apple emphasizes strong privacy. But with third-party models, and that's what we selected, your code is sent to them. And while most of those providers now promise not to train with it, it's still subject to their privacy policies. Now, personally, I think it would be really bad if it ever came out that these AI firms were training models on your potentially proprietary code. These models might have access to any code that you share publicly on GitHub, for example. But if you're working on some proprietary code, it should be able to use your current code to provide a quality response, but not use that code to further train the model. Now, with that said, if you're really concerned about this, you might want to take a look at the privacy policies of individual firms and how these apply to if you're using a free version or a paid version or an enterprise version. For our coursework, this isn't really a concern, but do be aware privacy policies change, and there have been cases where some companies have said, hey, we're not going to look at your private data, and they ended up doing it. Now, there's another button to the right of this. This is a lightning bolt button, and it says it will automatically apply code changes. This is on by default. Now, remember, you can always roll back any changes that are applied, but if you want to toggle this off, then you have to approve changes bit by bit. So again, I've reverted back to where I was when we started. I got rid of all that terrible glass effect code, and now let's try again. What I really want to do is just update the photo picker code that I've highlighted here, and I don't need to highlight the code, but I am going to put in a prompt that says, update the photo picker control for liquid glass. And now this is interesting. So my results up top say I'll update the photo picker control with liquid glass and also restore the image persistent functionality that was previously implemented. I didn't ask for that, but in a previous work today, before I started this recording, I did ask Xcode to update the code to save any image added from the photo library. Now we haven't done that yet, but we will. So Coding Intelligence is trying to add back code that I didn't explicitly ask for. Again, this is something you got to watch for with AI. It can often be overeager and do a lot of stuff you don't want it to do. Now it does give me that liquid glass effect button, which is sort of what I wanted, but it added all this other code in here for image persistence and image loading. Now I can click on any of these code bits and jump to where they are in my editor on the right, but in the prompt box down below, I'm going to try to get my code to look more like what you probably have by adding a prompt that says, you did a lot more than I wanted. Can you just update the control to liquid glass and not add all that other stuff? And when I press this, AI says you're absolutely right. Let me update the photo picker control with liquid glass style and revert the other changes. So I like this, but I'm not quite satisfied, so I'm going to add another prompt that says, this is nice, but can you make the glass prominent style in green and increase the size of the button? And AI chugs away at this, and it didn't do exactly what I wanted, so it added some padding inside of the button. So there's a lot more space around this than I wanted. Now again, if you're not happy with the result, you can click on the thumbs down. Apple doesn't allow me to provide any feedback here, but it says it will report a concern, so I'm going to submit the report. Now, I do assume that this is going to be used to improve the model training. I have no idea how this relates to the code that I've written and if that's shared back and used for training. If you find out any information about this, feel free to add it in the comments. The report goes in, and hopefully you're seeing the advantages now of using AI after you understand a bit about Swift and SwiftUI. I see way too much space inside the button, so I know to look for a padding inside of the button label. Yep, here it is right after the label statement, so I'm going to highlight and delete that. My button looks good, but you know what? I'd like a softer tint. Now in class, when we covered liquid glass, I mentioned that you could add after the tint color dot opacity and pass in a value. I'm going to put in 0.7. That adds about 30% transparency. 1.0 is what we had by default. That was completely opaque. And I think this looks nice. But now let me show you the last thing I want to use AI for. So our code currently allows us to select a new image, but the selected image isn't persisted. It's not remembered and reloaded the next time we run our app. Now to better demonstrate this, I'm going to run things in the simulator. So I clicked on the play button in the upper left, hammer time, no errors, and I'm seeing my launch screen didn't load. I went back and tried to figure out why, and the problem was that I had dragged my launch screen images, the launch screen, the 2x and the 3x image, inside a folder, and you can't do that. You can select and drag all three files at the same time, but let the asset catalog group them. Don't drag them over inside of a folder. I removed the folder, everything worked fine, and I also removed that folder from the course files drive just to make sure that there's no confusion. Now back to our running app, and I still have the coronavirus that I saved during an earlier lesson, so I can select and bip that. But now if I completely close the app I'm running, and I can do that by double tapping on the simulator's home button, then I can swipe up on the app just like I can on an iPhone to stop the app from running. But the app is still installed in the simulator, so I'll tap the BipTheGuy icon to launch the app again, and I can see the clown loads, not the coronavirus image. Now I'd like to keep the last image selected, saved, and continue to use that until I swap it out for another image, so let's use AI to change things for us. And I'll fast forward through this bit where I actually asked AI if there was a problem with my launch screen, and there wasn't any problem other than the fact that I put the files in a folder and I shouldn't have. AI didn't recognize that was a problem with the project. I had to figure that out on my own. But here's the good stuff, and AI is going to do a really good job at this. I'll prompt it with a question, can you update this app so that it saves the last image selected and uses that image until a new image is selected? And I'll speed up the response, but it did a good job. So if Xcode writes code for you, you always want to read through the code, and you can also learn a lot from it too. So I can see up top that it says this will require adding app storage to save the image data and updating the image loading logic. I can click up top and I can see it added an at storage property wrapper and it gave it a name. Then I can see in the closure in the image picker below where we had our guard statement, it added some more code in here. Now, unfortunately, I don't think AI did a good job of describing its updates, so it'd be good if you keep interrogating the AI, asking it for specific information about chunks of code that it wrote. I'll tell you super briefly, even though this lesson isn't about app storage, we created the app storage value with the name save image data. Now to save data, all we need to do is to take the image data from the photos picker and put that in the value that's named save image data. That makes the save happen automatically, but the data we're saving is the data type. It's not the image data type it was previously, and the code down here takes that data type that we use for saving data to the device, and it converts it back into an image so it can be used by SwiftUI. It also adds a load saved image function. That's called during onAppear, which means it's going to be called as soon as the app runs. All my code is described in here. But if you're new to Swift and SwiftUI, you might wonder, what's this user defaults all about? So you can highlight and copy this. Then down below, you can ask it, what is user defaults? And it responds up here. User defaults is a system service provided by Apple that allows you to store small pieces of data persistently on the device. So there's a great description up here, and this gives a really good example of how you can use coding intelligence to learn more about new techniques. Again, you don't want to blindly accept AI results, but you do want to use the results it gives you to learn. You also want to be critical because, as we've seen, it will often give you the wrong results or results that you don't want. But if we build and run, hammer time, no errors, we can click on Photo Library, select that Corona image, double-click the home button, swipe to stop our app from running, then launch the app again, and oh, look at this, my friends. The coronavirus loads. Coding Intelligence did a quite intelligent job of updating our app. Hopefully this was a useful introduction to Apple's new coding intelligence in Xcode 26 with Mac OS 26. Remember, you got to have both of those pieces working together in order to see the things that I just showed you. Use intelligently, use with caution, but I'm sure it'll help you to continue to learn big. Now keep hacking, there's more goodness to come.